Frank Lewis never asked for attention. At 68, the black bus driver simply did his job, ferrying passengers along Route 19 with quiet dignity. Until the day he stood up for a harassed mother and her child, only to find himself face down on the pavement, handcuffed by Officer Blake Murdoch, while bystanders recorded in shock. The police thought it would end there. Just another elderly man taught to stay in his place. They were catastrophically wrong. The deleted footage found its way to a Montana wilderness, where Caleb Lewis, Frank's son, decorated Green Beret, ghost among shadows, watched his father's blood stain the concrete. Captain Holloway's militarized precinct couldn't know. They'd just awakened a man who had turned killing into an art form. As Frank sat alone on his porch that evening, miles away Caleb methodically prepared for homecoming. Some men you can humiliate without consequence. Frank Lewis was not one of them. The soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated Frank Lewis's weathered face as he rose before the sun. At 68, his body protested with familiar aches, but his internal clock remained as reliable as ever. 4:30 in the morning. Same as when he'd served in Vietnam. Same as his 30 years driving city buses. Frank moved slowly through his modest home, a small two-bedroom house in the eastern part of the city. Pictures of his late wife Evelyn smiled at him from the walls. Frozen in time while he kept aging. He touched one frame gently, his morning ritual before heading to the kitchen. "Morning, Evelyn," he whispered. Another day. After a simple breakfast of instant oatmeal and black coffee, Frank buttoned his Metro Transit uniform shirt with careful precision. The collar was frayed slightly, the embroidered name patch faded from countless washings. But Frank kept it immaculate. Respect for the uniform, something he'd learned in the army and never forgotten. As Frank stepped onto his front porch with his thermos, he spotted Rico Martinez working under the hood of an old Chevy in the neighboring driveway. The 19-year-old mechanic prodigy waved enthusiastically. "Morning, Mr. Lewis." "Early as always." Frank smiled, his stern face softening. "Morning, Rico. That junker giving you trouble again?" "Nothing I can't handle," Rico wiped his hands on a rag. "Just need some love and attention, like your bus, right? Route 19's a lady who knows what she wants." Frank chuckled. "You staying out of trouble?" Rico's smile dimmed slightly. "Trying to, sir. Applied for that apprenticeship at Wilson's auto shop yesterday." "You'll get it," Frank said with certainty. "Best damn mechanic I've ever seen. And I've seen plenty." "Thanks, Mr. Lewis. That means a lot coming from you." Frank nodded, pleased to see the boy's smile return. He'd taken a quiet interest in Rico since the boy's father had been deported 3 years ago. Never mentioned it. Never made a fuss. Just kept an eye out. The way neighbors should. "Got to roll," Frank said, checking his watch. "Bus won't drive itself. Yet." Rico laughed. "They keep talking about those self-driving buses." "Not in my lifetime," Frank replied. "Some things need a human touch." The walk to the transit depot took 12 minutes exactly. Frank greeted the night shift dispatchers, checked his route clipboard, and performed his pre-trip inspection on bus 92187 with methodical care. Every mirror adjusted perfectly. Every emergency exit checked. Every inch of his route mapped in his mind. By 6:15, Frank was pulling out of the depot, headed for his first stop on Route 19. The city was just beginning to stir. Streetlights still glowing against the pre-dawn purple sky. Frank felt the familiar calm settle over him. Behind the wheel, here he knew exactly what to do, and how to do it. The first passengers of the day were the usual crowd, night shift hospital workers heading home, early morning construction crews, kitchen staff for downtown restaurants. Frank knew most by name, greeting them with a quiet nod or a "morning" as they boarded. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis," said Martha, a night nurse from Memorial Hospital. "Cold one today." "Morning, Martha." They treating you right over there? Same as always, she sighed, dropping her fare in the box. Too many patients, not enough hands. Frank nodded sympathetically. Your grandson's still playing ball? The woman's tired face brightened. Championship game this weekend. He's pitching. He'll do great. Got his grandmother's determination. The small exchange took seconds, but Frank saw Martha's shoulders relax as she made her way to a seat. These small moments, the human connections, made the city feel less cold. They mattered. As the morning progressed and the bus filled with the daily commuters, Frank navigated through the changing neighborhoods of his route. Route 19 ran from the eastern working-class districts, through areas of rapid gentrification, and into the financial district downtown. Frank watched the transformation of his city every day, through the windows of his bus. Old family businesses replaced by artisanal coffee shops. For rent, signs multiplying. Long-time residents disappearing. By 9:30, the bus carried a mix of people that represented the city's divisions. Tired mothers with small children. Teenagers with headphones. Businesspeople staring at phones. Elderly passengers clutching shopping bags. Frank kept the peace with quiet authority, a moving community under his watch. At the Westfield Avenue stop, a young man boarded who immediately set Frank on edge. Tall and wiry, with angry eyes. He swayed slightly as he dropped his fare in the box. The smell of alcohol wasn't strong, but it was there. Frank nodded politely. Morning, sir. Please find a seat. The man, later identified as Trent Wilson, scowled but moved down the aisle. Frank watched him in the mirror, noting how other passengers subtly shifted away. A young Latina woman sat near the middle of the bus, holding a sleeping toddler on her lap. Trent chose the seat directly behind her. For several blocks, everything remained calm. Then Frank heard it. The low mutter of insults, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Taking all the jobs. Go back to where you came from. Frank glanced in his mirror again. The young mother stared straight ahead, her arms tightening around her child. Her face remained composed, but Frank saw the fear in her eyes. Other passengers looked uncomfortably at their phones or out the windows. Pretending not to hear. The muttering grew louder. Hey! I'm talking to you, lady. Don't you understand English? Frank pulled the bus smoothly to the next stop. No passengers were waiting to board. He secured the brake and stood up, turning to face the interior. Sir, he said calmly, addressing Trent. I need you to keep your voice down. We've got a sleeping child here. Trent's eyes narrowed. Mind your own business, old man. I paid my fare. You did, Frank agreed. And the fare buys you transportation. Not the right to disturb other passengers. Now please keep it down, or you'll need to exit at the next stop. You threatening me? Trent stood up, towering over the seated mother and child. The toddler stirred and began to whimper. Frank's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. No threats. Just policy. This is a public bus. And everyone has the right to ride in peace. What Frank didn't see, was a passenger in the back of the bus, discreetly making a phone call. Speaking in hushed, urgent tones. There's a situation on the number 19 bus. Yeah, a black man is threatening people. He's being aggressive. Near the corner of Westfield and Monroe, Frank stepped closer to Trent, still maintaining a respectful distance. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the bus at this stop. Like hell I will, Trent's voice rose, and the toddler began crying in earnest. You can't make me do anything, old man. Frank stood his ground. Sir, I don't want any trouble. Please step off the bus now. Another passenger, an older gentleman in a business suit, stood up. Listen to the driver, buddy. Just go cool off somewhere else for a moment. Trent seemed to waver. Then, with a final glare at the mother and Frank, he stormed toward the door. "This is Bull's asterisk asterisk asterisk. I'm filing a complaint." "That's your right," Frank said evenly, returning to his seat. As Trent exited, he glanced back at the young mother. "You okay, miss?" She nodded, soothing her crying child. "Thank you," she said softly. Frank restarted the route, unaware that the situation was far from over. 2 stops later, as passengers exited and entered in the routine dance of public transit, Frank noticed a police cruiser pull alongside the bus with lights flashing. His heart sank slightly. Paperwork. Delays. Not what his passengers needed. Frank opened the doors, expecting an officer to step aboard with questions about the earlier incident. Instead, Officer Blake Murdoch charged up the steps with his hand on his holstered weapon, face tight with adrenaline. "Driver. Step off the vehicle now," Murdoch shouted, his stance aggressive. Frank blinked in confusion. "Officer, is there a problem? I had a disruptive passenger earlier, but he's gone now. Hands where I can see them. Exit the vehicle immediately." Murdoch's hand moved to fully grip his weapon. Behind him, Officer Dana Rivas appeared at the door, her expression more measured but equally tense. "Sir, please comply," she said firmly. Bewildered, but not wanting to escalate the situation, Frank raised his hands slowly. "I'm complying, officers. Just let me secure the bus first." "Now." Murdoch barked. Frank carefully set the brake and switched off the engine. The passengers watched in stunned silence as he stood and moved toward the door. The moment Frank stepped onto the sidewalk, Murdoch grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him face first against the side of the bus. "Officer, what is this about?" Frank asked, his voice strained, as Murdoch wrenched his arms behind his back. "We received reports of a hostile black male threatening passengers," Murdoch growled, cinching handcuffs tightly around Frank's wrists. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Frank said calmly, though panic began to rise in his chest. "There's been a mistake. I'm the driver. The hostile passenger left the bus 10 minutes ago." Officer Rivas glanced uncertainly at the passengers, now pressing against the windows, some shouting protests. "Blake, I think." "Shut up and secure the scene." Murdoch snapped, forcing Frank to the ground. The asphalt scraped Frank's cheek as Murdoch's knee pressed into his back. The young mother with the toddler rushed off the bus. "Officers, stop. He's the driver. He protected us from a drunk man who was harassing us." Murdoch ignored her. "Stay back, ma'am. This is police business." Frank lay on the pavement. The weight of Murdoch's knee made it difficult to breathe. His lips were bleeding from the impact with the ground. Pain radiated through his ribs. A teenage boy from across the street had his phone out, live streaming the incident. Other bystanders gathered, many recording. Voices rising in protest. "He didn't do anything. That's the bus driver, you idiots. He's an old man. What are you doing?" Officer Rivas approached her partner. "Blake, the witnesses are saying he's the driver. I think we need to." "I've got this under control," Murdoch hissed, jerking Frank to his feet. "We're taking him in for questioning." Frank, dazed and hurting, caught the eye of the teenager filming. "Tell Rico what happened," he managed to say before being shoved into the back of the police cruiser. Hours later, after being processed, questioned, and finally released without charges, Frank Lewis limped home. No apology. No explanation. Just a dismissive, "You're free to go," from the desk sergeant. As darkness fell, Frank sat alone on his porch, touching his swollen lip gingerly. He hadn't called anyone. Hadn't reported to the transit authority. Just called in sick for tomorrow and sat in silence, watching darkness settle over his neighborhood. Across the country, in a remote cabin nestled in the Montana wilderness, a man sat in a dimly lit room. Military precision defined the space, maps on the walls, surveillance equipment humming softly, weapons stored with meticulous care. The man's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he cleaned a high-powered rifle. On a laptop screen before him played a video, the teenager's live stream, recovered from a dark web mirror site after being mysteriously removed from social media platforms within hours of posting. The man paused the video on a frame showing Frank Lewis's bloodied face pressed against the pavement. His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on the rifle. Caleb Lewis. Frank's estranged son. Former Green Beret sniper with the highest confirmed kill count in his unit's history. He set down the cleaning cloth and reached for his phone. It was time to go home. The cabin's interior told Caleb Lewis's story more truthfully than any military record ever could. Tactical maps covered one wall, not just of foreign territories, but of American cities as well. Glass cases held medals he never wore, but couldn't bring himself to discard. A worn journal sat open on the desk, filled with entries written in a precise, controlled hand. Dates. Distances. Weather conditions. Kills. Caleb stood at the window, staring across the vast Montana wilderness that had been his refuge for 3 years. In his hand, he held a printed screenshot of his father's bloodied face. The rage he felt wasn't hot or explosive, it was cold. Focused. The kind that made him the most dangerous sniper in Green Beret history. The ham radio in the corner crackled to life. Whiskey Echo 7 to Longshot. Confirm receipt of visual data packet. Caleb crossed to the radio. Received. Assessment. Local PD suppressed footage through back channels. Officer identified as Blake Murdoch. 5 excessive force complaints in 3 years, all dismissed. Department under Captain Jerry Holloway. Private security connections. Proceed with caution. Understood. Long shot going dark. Caleb switched off the radio and picked up his phone. The number he dialed hadn't been used in nearly 4 years. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered, cool and professional. Melanie Parker. It's me, Caleb said simply. The silence stretched for several seconds. I thought we said all we needed to say. They touched my father. The tone shifted immediately. What happened? As Caleb explained, he moved through the cabin, already packing essential equipment. Weapons. Surveillance gear. Identity documents. The tools of a ghost who never truly left the war behind. The city's changed, Caleb, Melanie said when he finished. Holloway's taken over half the district with his private security contracts. They're militarizing the police faster than anyone can track. Good. Then they'll understand what real military tactics look like. Caleb, don't. I'm not asking for permission, Mel. Just letting you know, I'm coming. After a pause, she sighed. Your father needs more than a vengeful son with a sniper rifle. I know. That's why I called you first. 3 days later, Frank Lewis sat in a sterile waiting area at the police precinct. His bruises had deepened to a mottled purple. His lips still swollen, despite the ice he'd applied. The young desk officer barely glanced at him. I'd like to file a complaint about my treatment during an arrest 3 days ago, Frank said quietly. The officer didn't look up from his computer. Fill out this form. Frank took the paperwork and spent 30 minutes meticulously documenting the incident. When he returned it to the desk, the officer scanned it with visible disinterest. We'll review this and contact you if necessary, he said, tossing the form into a tray. When might I expect to hear something? Frank asked. The officer finally looked at him, eyes cold. Look, old-timer, you want some advice? You want to make this worse for yourself? Because that's what happens to people who push this kind of thing. Frank held the man's gaze, decades of dignity in his posture despite the pain in his ribs. I just want it on record. It's on record. Now move along. There are people with real problems waiting. Frank walked slowly out of the precinct, the weight of humiliation heavier than his physical injuries. As he waited at the bus stop, now a passenger instead of a driver, Frank didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street, or the man inside watching him through polarized windows. Across town, Officer Dana Rivas sat in her car in the precinct parking lot long after her shift had ended. On the passenger seat lay a voice recorder, and a manila folder containing photocopied internal reports. Her hand hovered over them, indecision written across her face. The incident with Frank Lewis wasn't the first time Blake Murdoch had escalated a situation unnecessarily. It wasn't even the 10th time. But it was the first time Dana had secretly recorded the aftermath. Murdoch bragging in the break room about teaching the old man a lesson. Captain Holloway's dismissive laughter. The casual agreement to adjust the report. Her phone buzzed with a text from Murdoch. Drinks tonight. Team building. Captain's orders. Dana stared at the message, then at the folder beside her. Was she protecting herself by collecting evidence, or was she finally finding the courage to protect others? She wasn't sure yet. At that moment, in an upscale downtown cafe, Melanie Parker sat across from Nina Holloway, the 22-year-old daughter of Captain Jerry Holloway, and an outspoken community activist studying criminal justice at the local community college. Your father's new security contracts are raising serious concerns, Melanie said, her recorder discreetly placed between them. Private entities performing public policing functions with minimal oversight. Nina pushed her dark hair behind her ears, a nervous gesture that contrasted with her confident voice. That's why I agreed to talk to you. Dad thinks I don't know what's happening, but the community forums are filled with stories. Increased stops in certain neighborhoods. Confiscated phones. Deleted videos. Like what happened to Frank Lewis. Nina's eyes widened. You know about that? I just heard his name at a town hall meeting yesterday. An elderly bus driver assaulted during an arrest. She leaned forward. Was that Murdoch's work? Captain's golden boy, Melanie nodded. The footage vanished within hours. Not all of it, Nina said quietly. My friend works IT at the precinct. He says there's a shadow server where it all goes. As they continued their conversation, neither noticed the man at a corner table, baseball cap pulled low, listening to every word. That evening, Frank Lewis sat on his porch steps in the gathering darkness, sipping tea that did little to ease the ache in his bones. The neighborhood was quiet, most families already inside for dinner. His mind wandered to his son. Not as the hardened warrior he'd become, but as the sensitive boy who'd drawn detailed pictures of birds and collected interesting rocks. The boy who'd enlisted after September 11th with idealistic fervor, returning from multiple deployments increasingly remote. Until the day he'd exploded at Frank for not understanding what it's like out there, and disappeared from his life. Frank was so lost in memory that he almost missed the small white envelope that had appeared on his welcome mat. No stamp. No address. Just his name, in a familiar, precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, Frank opened it and read the simple message inside. You don't have to stand alone anymore. For the first time since the incident on the bus, Frank Lewis broke down and wept. Miles away, in a nondescript motel room, Caleb Lewis methodically assembled surveillance equipment. 3 separate phones with scrambled signals. Laptop with secure VPN. Topographical maps of the city with key locations marked, the precinct. His father's home. Officer Murdoch's address. Captain Holloway's office and residence. On the bed lay a tactical vest, non-military clothing in neutral colors, and a case containing specialized equipment that few outside elite special forces had ever seen. Caleb moved with the focus of a man who had never truly left the battlefield. Because for him, the war had simply changed locations. Now, it had come to his father's doorstep. And Caleb Lewis was about to bring the fight back to those who had started it. His phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. She's interested. Meeting tomorrow. Watch your back. Ghost is in play. Caleb's expression hardened. If Ghost was involved, the situation was even more complex than he'd anticipated. Ghost, the code name for the handler who'd run Caleb's most classified operations. The man who'd enabled the darkest missions. And then disappeared when scrutiny came. Outside Officer Dana Rivas' apartment, Caleb sat watching as she paced inside, phone to her ear, gesturing emphatically. He couldn't hear her words, but her body language told him she was conflicted. Afraid. A potential ally, if he could reach her before fear pushed her back in line. Tomorrow, he would make his first move. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Officer Dana Rivas left her apartment building. She walked to her car with keys clutched between her fingers, a habit from police academy training. The parking lot was still dark. Streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. Dana didn't notice the figure who had been there all night, watching from a parked sedan 3 spaces down. She didn't see him slip from his vehicle as she unlocked her car door. She had no idea that while she slept, her car had been accessed, a small device planted beneath her dashboard. Only when she started the engine and her radio suddenly switched off, then on again, did she pause. A burst of static. Then silence. Dana frowned. Adjusted the dial. Continued her morning routine. She was halfway to the precinct when her phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Rivas, she answered cautiously. A strange, electronically distorted voice responded. He will fall. You still have time to choose a side. Dana nearly swerved off the road. Who is this? The line went dead. She pulled over, hands shaking as she tried to call the number back. The automated voice informed her the number didn't exist. For the remainder of her drive, Dana checked her rearview mirror every few seconds. The uneasy feeling of being watched crawling up her spine. Across town, Officer Blake Murdoch was beginning his morning patrol in a predominantly black neighborhood that bordered the rapidly gentrifying West Side district. He rolled slowly past corner stores just opening. Past bus stops where workers huddled against the morning chill. His radio crackled. Unit 237. We've got reports of gang graffiti on the south wall of Anderson Elementary. Possible gang activity in progress. Blake grabbed his radio. Unit 237 responding. He hit the gas. Pleased for the action. Gang activity meant potential arrests. And Blake needed to boost his numbers this month. What Blake didn't know, was that the call had been routed through a scrambled channel operated remotely by a man sitting in a parked car 2 blocks from the school. When Blake arrived, the school's wall was indeed freshly painted. A crude gang symbol still glistening wet. No perpetrators in sight. But Blake noticed a group of black teenagers walking nearby. Hey! You! Stop right there, he shouted, hand moving to his weapon. The teens froze, raising their hands instinctively. We didn't do nothing, officer, one boy said, terrified. Against the wall, all of you, Blake ordered, adrenaline pumping. What happened next would be disputed in official reports, but was captured perfectly by the hidden camera Caleb had mounted on the school's rain gutter earlier that morning. Blake's escalation. The teens' confusion. The unnecessary roughness as he handcuffed 3 minors who had simply been walking to school. And later that day, an anonymous tip, with video footage, would arrive at the desk of Internal Affairs. The 3rd complaint against Blake Murdoch in as many weeks. Night fell on Frank Lewis's small house. He sat at his kitchen table, sipping tea and reading the newspaper, a habit unchanged despite the digital age. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from Evelyn's parents, 40 years ago. The sound of tires on gravel drew his attention. Through the window, Frank saw an unmarked police cruiser rolling slowly past his house. Headlights off. It was the 3rd night in a row. Frank drew the curtains closed and checked the locks on his doors. The bruises on his face had faded to yellowish smudges. But the deeper injury to his sense of security remained raw. As he prepared for bed, a crash of breaking glass shattered the silence. Frank moved cautiously to the living room, to find a brick on the floor, surrounded by the glittering remains of his front window. Attached to the brick was a note. "Your mouth got your son killed once. Don't let it happen again." Frank stared at the message, confused and shaken. His son wasn't dead. Estranged, yes. But not dead. Was this a threat? A mistake? Either way, the implication was clear. Someone knew about Caleb. And they were watching Frank. The next morning, Frank made his way to the community college, where Nina Holloway was hosting a legal aid workshop. Students and community members filled a small lecture hall, many taking notes as Nina introduced a panel of law students offering free consultations. Frank waited until the formal presentation ended before approaching her. "Ms. Holloway," he said quietly. Nina turned, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Lewis. Frank Lewis. You know who I am." "Of course," she said, lowering her voice. "I heard about what happened on your bus route. That officer, Murdoch, he works directly under my father." Frank nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. I need legal advice." But the precinct made it clear, filing a complaint would only bring more trouble. Nina's expression hardened. "They threatened you?" "Not directly," Frank said, showing her the note that had come through his window. Nina studied it, her hands trembling slightly. "This mentions your son." "My boy, Caleb. We haven't spoken in years. But he's very much alive, at least he was the last I knew." "Mr. Lewis, this is serious." Nina glanced around the emptying lecture hall. "Come with me. My friend Spencer is in his final year of law school. He can help us understand your options." As they walked down the hallway, neither noticed the custodian mopping the floor nearby. His cap pulled low over his eyes. His movements allowing him to stay within earshot. Miles away, in an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath the city, a meeting was taking place in the shadows. A man known only as Ghost, silver-haired, expensive watch, scarred hands, held another man by the throat against a graffiti-covered wall. "I know he's back," Ghost hissed. "Caleb Lewis is operating in my territory." "I don't know what you're talking about," gasped the terrified informant, a former Army Ranger who had served with Caleb. Ghost tightened his grip. 8 years we ran ops together. 8 years I covered his tracks. Protected his identity. He doesn't get to bring his personal vendetta into my city. Lewis is a ghost himself, the informant choked out. If he doesn't want to be found, you won't find him. Ghost released his grip, allowing the man to slide down the wall gasping for air. Everyone can be found. Everyone has a weakness. He straightened his tailored suit jacket. And he's just had a brick thrown through his window. In the offices of the Independent Voice, a small but respected news outlet, Melanie Parker sat surrounded by stacks of documents. Her computer screen displayed property records, city contracts, and police incident reports, a digital trail connecting Captain Jerry Holloway to a private security firm called Vanguard Shield. Her phone rang, a secure line few people had access to. "I found something," she said without preamble. Vanguard Shield isn't just providing equipment and training to the police department. They're running surveillance on citizens. Building profiles on community organizers. And they have overseas operations. Military contracts. On the other end of the line, Caleb's voice was measured. "How deep does it go?" "Deep enough that when I filed a records request about their city contracts, I got a visit from Homeland Security. Warning me about national security implications. They're watching you now." "Probably," Melanie closed her laptop. "Caleb, this is bigger than what happened to your father." "I know," he said. "But my father is where it starts." Later that evening, in a disadvantaged neighborhood on the city's south side, 15-year-old Jamal Washington walked home from basketball practice. Headphones on. Hoodie up against the cool night air. The flashing lights of a police cruiser reflected in a store window ahead of him. Jamal instinctively tensed. Officer Blake Murdoch stepped out, hand already on his weapon. "Take those headphones off, kid. Let me see some ID." "I'm just walking home, sir," Jamal said, heart racing, as he removed his headphones. "ID, now." Blake's voice carried the edge it always did in neighborhoods like this one. "I'm 15. I don't have." Blake grabbed Jamal's arm, spinning him around. "Hands against the wall. Now." "What did I do?" Jamal's voice cracked with fear. Matching the description of a suspect, Blake said, though no calls had come through about any suspects in the area. As Blake began an aggressive pat-down, the cruiser's dashboard camera suddenly went dark. Its indicator light blinking off. Simultaneously, Jamal's phone, tucked in his back pocket, began recording without his knowledge. Activated remotely, by someone parked across the street. "Listen, kid," Blake said, leaning close to Jamal's ear. "This neighborhood belongs to us now. You tell your friends. Your family. Anybody gives us trouble, they'll wish they hadn't. We're cleaning up the streets. One way or another." The entire interaction was captured perfectly. The threats. The intimidation. The absence of any legitimate cause for the stop. And by morning, the video would be in the hands of both Melanie Parker and Internal Affairs. The following day, Dana Rivas sat in her car outside Melanie Parker's office building, gripping a flash drive like it might burn through her palm. 3 years on the force. And here she was, about to cross a line that could end her career. Or worse. She'd spent the night reviewing the audio recordings she'd secretly made, Holloway ordering the example made of Frank Lewis, Murdoch bragging about roughing up teenagers, the casual discussion of which community organizers needed to be dealt with. The voice on the phone haunted her. "You still have time to choose a side." Gathering her courage, Dana entered the building and asked for Melanie Parker. 20 minutes later, she walked out with lighter hands, and a heavier heart. The decision was made. There was no going back. As darkness settled over the city that night, Frank Lewis heard a soft knock at his back door. His hand moved to the baseball bat he'd begun keeping nearby, his heart hammering in his chest. "Who's there?" he called. "It's me, Pop." The voice froze Frank in place. After a moment, he moved to the door and opened it slowly. There stood Caleb Lewis. Now 38, but seeming older, his face weathered by sun and experience. His eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare Frank recognized from his own war. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of years and unspoken words hanging between them. "You going to invite me in?" Caleb finally asked, his voice softer than Frank remembered. Frank stepped back, allowing his son to enter. They moved to the kitchen, the same space where they'd had their last explosive argument 4 years earlier. Frank put on the kettle. An old habit when nervous. "You saw what happened," Frank said. "It wasn't a question." Caleb nodded. "I should have been here. You had your reasons for staying away." "Bad reasons." Caleb looked around the kitchen, noting the changes, and similarities. "You still got Mom's teapot. Some things you don't replace." The kettle whistled. Frank busied himself preparing tea, using the familiar ritual to collect his thoughts. "Why did you disappear, son?" he finally asked, setting a steaming mug before Caleb. "For years. Not even a phone call." Caleb stared into the mug. "Because the war never ended for me, Pop. I came back, but I never really left it behind. The things I did over there." He shook his head. "I couldn't bring that darkness into your home. So instead you brought nothing. I thought it was better that way." Frank's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his own mug. And now? What changed? Caleb's eyes hardened. They put their hands on you. Frank studied his son's face, recognizing the dangerous calm he'd seen in other veterans. Men standing on the edge of violence, held back by the thinnest thread of control. What are you planning, Caleb? Justice. There are proper channels. Like the complaint you tried to file, Caleb cut in. The one they threatened you for making. Frank had no answer for that. I'm not going to let them hurt you again, Caleb said with quiet intensity. Or anyone else. Before Frank could respond, a sound from the front porch caught their attention. Caleb motioned for his father to stay put as he moved silently through the darkened house. Moments later, he returned with another note in his hand. Keep your mouth shut, or next time it won't be just a brick, Caleb read, his voice deadly calm. Frank watched his son's expression shift, subtle, but unmistakable. The soldier emerging from behind the civilian mask. They have no idea who they're threatening, Caleb said softly. That night, after Caleb had gone, refusing to tell Frank where he was staying, the precinct's front door received its own message. A single piece of paper, nailed to the wood. Your sins are numbered. The story broke at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Corruption in blue, police department tied to private military contractor, blazed across the Independent Voice's website. Melanie Parker's byline bold beneath the headline. The article was devastating in its precision. Built on Dana Rivas recordings, internal documents, and meticulous reporting, it revealed altered arrest reports, hidden body cam footage, and a clear data trail connecting Captain Jerry Holloway's precinct to Vanguard Shield, a private security contractor with a shadowy history of overseas military operations. By noon, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. By evening, protesters gathered outside the precinct, their signs demanding accountability, their chants echoing through downtown streets. Inside his office, Captain Holloway slammed down his phone after another call from the mayor's office. His face was flushed with rage as he addressed the officers gathered for an emergency meeting. This is a coordinated attack on our department, he growled. These so-called leaks are nothing but fabrications from disgruntled elements trying to undermine law and order in our city. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Many had read the article. Some had heard the leaked audio recordings, of their own captain instructing them to focus enforcement efforts on neighborhoods opposing the Vanguard Shield contracts. But sir, a younger officer ventured, the recordings sound doctored. Holloway barked. And I know exactly who's behind it. He clicked a remote, bringing up a military file photo on the wall screen. A grainy image of Caleb Lewis in uniform. This man is a former Green Beret sniper. Mentally unstable. Harboring a grudge against this department. He's targeting our officers and spreading disinformation. Dana Rivas, seated at the back of the room, kept her expression carefully neutral, even as her stomach knotted with anxiety. She'd been careful covering her tracks. But Holloway's resources were extensive. As of now, we consider this individual armed and extremely dangerous, Holloway continued. A domestic terrorist threat to this department. And this city. After the meeting, Dana drove home, constant glances in her rearview mirror. The sensation of being watched had become her constant companion. When she arrived at her apartment building, she immediately sensed something wrong. The door was slightly ajar. The lock, splintered. Inside, chaos. Furniture overturned. Papers scattered. Laptop missing. On her bathroom mirror, written in her own lipstick. Traitors bleed. With shaking hands, Dana packed a bag, grabbed her backup weapon from its hiding place, and fled. There was only one person she could think to call, someone who might understand the danger she was in. Across town, Nina Holloway sat in her apartment, watching her father's press conference on television. Captain Holloway stood before a forest of microphones. projecting calm authority as he declared a rogue sniper was targeting his officers. "We have evidence linking this individual to anti-police extremist groups," he stated confidently. "And we will not rest until he is apprehended." Nina turned off the TV, her stomach churning. The man in the grainy photo, Caleb Lewis, was the son of the bus driver her father's officer had assaulted. The connections were becoming clearer. And the image of her father was becoming unrecognizable. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello. Nina. It's Dana Rivas. Officer Rivas. I need help. Someone broke into my apartment. I think it was Blake. Or someone working for your father." Nina hesitated, only briefly. "Where are you now?" "Corner of Maple and 7th. The diner." "Stay there. I'm coming." On the outskirts of the industrial district, Caleb Lewis received a message on his secure phone. Police scanner chatter, gang activity reported at the old Westbrook factory complex. Murdoch responding personally. With backup. Caleb smiled grimly. The bait had been taken. The abandoned factory had been carefully prepared over the previous 2 days. Controlled entry and exit points. Light and sound manipulated to create disorientation. Multiple vantage points, established with clear sight lines. A hunter's ground, designed by a master predator. Officer Blake Murdoch arrived with 2 patrol cars as backup, eager to redeem himself after the embarrassments of recent days. He took command immediately. "Peterson, cover the west entrance. Sanders, take the loading dock. I'll go in through the front. These gangbangers think they can use our city as their playground. Time to teach them different." The backup officers exchanged uneasy glances, but followed orders. Blake drew his weapon and entered the main building alone. Flashlight cutting through the dusty darkness. What happened inside was later pieced together from Blake's own confused report, and physical evidence. A series of distractions. Sounds of movement. Glimpses of shadows, led him deeper into the building. Separating him from his backup. His radio failed, at a crucial moment. Emergency lights activated suddenly, then cut out. Leaving him in total darkness. And then, the shot. A single, precise round. That struck Blake's service weapon, shattering it in his hand. Without breaking his skin. Panicked, Blake fired wildly with his backup weapon, emptying the magazine into the darkness. Outside, civilians walking past the factory scattered, as bullets pierced the thin metal walls and shattered windows. The officers' wild firing, caught perfectly on camera by coincidental news vans that happened to be in the area. By the time backup reached him, Blake was huddled in a corner, weapon empty, hands bleeding from the shards of his destroyed service pistol. From a rooftop 3 buildings away, Caleb packed his rifle methodically. The message had been delivered. "I can hit whatever I want. Whenever I want. And I chose not to hurt you, this time." Captain Holloway's panic manifested as rage in his office. He slammed his fist into the wall repeatedly, speaking on a secure line. "I don't care about protocols. I want the full Vanguard team activated. Now. This is exactly the situation we prepared for." Within hours, black SUVs with tinted windows and no license plates began appearing throughout the city. Men in tactical gear, but no police insignia, established checkpoints in key neighborhoods. Drone surveillance increased. Hovering over public gatherings. And protests. The city began to feel like an occupied territory. That evening, Melanie Parker sat in the back office of Channel 8 News with her old college friend, Sarah Wilson, now a producer for the evening broadcast. "I need 10 minutes of airtime," Melanie said. "Unedited. Live." Sarah shook her head. "You know I can't do that. Especially not with the pressure we're getting from the mayor's office to tone down coverage of the protests." What if I had footage that proves Officer Murdoch fired indiscriminately into a public street? What if I had evidence that Captain Holloway is using a private military contractor to suppress citizens' rights? Sarah's expression changed. How solid is it? Bulletproof. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. And if anyone asks, I'll say you blackmailed me. Melanie smiled. Just like college. The segment aired at 6:35 p.m. Just after the weather report. No introduction. No warning. Just raw footage of Blake Murdoch's panicked shooting spree. Followed by Holloway's recorded voice, ordering officers to make examples of community leaders opposing the Vanguard Shield contract. The station cut the feed after exactly 3 minutes. But it was too late. The story had broken through the carefully constructed narrative. Social media exploded. Protest numbers doubled overnight. In Captain Holloway's elegant suburban home, Nina confronted her father. She found him in his study, phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders in a clipped military tone. I don't care how you do it. Find Rivas. And shut her up. He looked up to see his daughter standing in the doorway, and quickly ended the call. Nina. You shouldn't be here right now. Is it true? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Did you order Officer Murdoch to make an example of Frank Lewis? You're listening to lies and propaganda. I have ears, Dad. I heard the recording. Your voice. Holloway's expression hardened. You don't understand the pressures of maintaining order. Sometimes, examples need to be made. Of innocent people. Of elderly bus drivers protecting women and children. There are no innocent people in this equation, Nina. Just those who understand the world is changing, and those who need to be shown the new reality. Nina took a step back, staring at her father as if seeing him for the first time. What happened to you? What happened to protect and serve? Grow up, Nina. That's a slogan for recruitment posters. Real power comes from control. And control requires force. He moved closer. The department is evolving. Vanguard Shield is the future. We're creating a new model of security that will spread across the country. It's not security, Nina whispered. It's occupation. Holloway laughed softly. Such dramatic language. You're still so young. What Captain Holloway didn't realize, was that Nina's phone was in her pocket. Recording every word of his admission. By morning, the audio would be in Melanie Parker's hands. The city was no longer simmering. It was boiling. Within 48 hours of the Channel 8 broadcast, peaceful protests had turned into mass demonstrations. Community leaders gave impassioned speeches on courthouse steps. Clergy opened their sanctuaries as safe houses. College students staged sit-ins. And in every corner of the city, the name Frank Lewis became a symbol. A quiet man. A working man. Who had simply tried to do the right thing, and been brutalized for it. Frank sat in his living room, watching the images unfold on his old television set. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that something irreversible had been set in motion. He'd never wanted to be a symbol. But now his face was painted on murals. Printed on signs. Projected on the side of buildings downtown. When the doorbell rang, Frank opened it to find Melanie Parker on his porch, a backpack slung over one shoulder, her face tired but determined. I think it's time we talk, she said. Frank nodded and stepped aside. Across the city, in an underground parking garage, Caleb Lewis met with Dana Rivas. Their conversation brief, spoken in code, shaped by military brevity. You still have the server key? Dana nodded. Encrypted. Hidden. Good, Caleb said. You'll need to release it soon. Holloway's planning something. A hard push. Dana looked around nervously. You think he's going to declare a lockdown? More than that. He'll paint protesters as domestic extremists. Claim the city is under siege. Then deploy Vanguard shield in full. Dana swallowed hard. People will die. Caleb's jaw tightened. Not if I get to him first. At police headquarters, Captain Holloway stood before a digital map of the city, lights blinking to represent movement, patrols, and known protest zones. Blake Murdoch entered, his hand wrapped in bandages, his expression bruised but defiant. You called for me, sir. Holloway didn't look up. How's the hand? Fractured. They said I'm lucky I didn't lose any fingers. And the report you filed? Untraceable. No prints. Whoever disarmed me, knew exactly what they were doing. Holloway finally turned. It was Caleb Lewis. Blake nodded. I figured. He's not just coming for me, Holloway said. He's coming for everything I've built. He handed Blake a tablet, displaying a photo of Frank Lewis. We bring him in. Publicly. Discredit him. Make it look like he's been feeding his son intel. Paint him as the real mastermind. Blake frowned. He's an old man. That's what makes it perfect, Holloway said coldly. No one suspects the old man. Until we tell them to. Melanie sat across from Frank, a recorder on the coffee table between them. This is your chance to speak, she said gently. Tell them what happened. From your perspective. Frank looked into her eyes, then out the window, where another patrol car cruised slowly by. And then he began. From the first moment on the bus that morning. To the slam of his body against the pavement. To the handcuffs. The bruises. The silence. He told her everything. When he finished, Melanie simply said, "Thank you." She left the house 10 minutes later. Frank watched her disappear down the street. And then the front window shattered. Again. This time, a tear gas canister rolled across the living room floor. Frank coughed, stumbling backward. He caught a glimpse of figures in riot gear moving toward the porch, black masks, no badges, weapons drawn. A voice on a megaphone. Frank Lewis, exit the house with your hands up. You are under arrest for conspiracy to incite violence. Frank stumbled toward the back door. But it burst open before he reached it, and Caleb stood there, rifle slung over one shoulder, gas mask covering his face. Come with me, Pop. Frank didn't argue. What followed was a blur. Flashbangs outside the front door. A wall of tear gas. Shouts. The roar of an armored vehicle as it tore up the lawn. But Frank and Caleb were already gone. Through the alley. Over the fence. Into the shadows. They made it to a safe house on the edge of the city, an old building Caleb had once used for training exercises. Soundproofed. Windowless. Invisible. Frank sat on a cot, wheezing. Why now? He asked hoarsely. Caleb poured him water. Because they escalated. Frank shook his head. No, I mean why are you back in my life, now? Caleb hesitated. Then said simply. Because I finally realized the war didn't end over there. It just changed names. And it came for you. That night, Dana Rivas made her way to the local news studio, escorted by Nina Holloway and Melanie Parker. In her hands, the flash drive. The server key. The proof. At exactly 9 p.m., Channel 8 interrupted its regularly scheduled programming. Live. Unfiltered. The city watched, as Rivas introduced herself. Explained what she'd seen. Heard. Recorded. Then she played the final audio. Captain Holloway, speaking in his own words. We're not cleaning up the streets. We're replacing them. Old neighborhoods with new ones. Old citizens with compliant ones. And if a few Frank Lewises have to get knocked down along the way, so be it. The clip ended. The screen went black. Then. We are all Frank Lewis. In bold letters. Within 24 hours, Captain Holloway was suspended. The Department of Justice announced an investigation. And the mayor, previously silent, issued a statement calling for the immediate dismantling of Vanguard shield operations in the city. But it wasn't over. That night, a final stand was made. As protesters gathered for a midnight vigil at City Hall, an unmarked van tried to break the crowd. Inside, armed Vanguard shield operatives prepared to restore order. What they didn't expect was Caleb Lewis waiting on the rooftop across the street. A single, non-lethal shot struck the van's engine block, followed by a second shot that detonated a smoke device behind it. Panic erupted, then died as fast as it had begun. Protesters held their ground. Cameras caught everything. By sunrise, Vanguard Shield's CEO had resigned. Federal agents had seized the precinct's hard drives. And the city, finally breathed. Weeks passed. Frank returned to his porch. The window repaired. The bruises faded. But the scars, invisible and deep, remained. He sat with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise. Beside him, Caleb. Still quiet. Still distant. But present. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Down the street, Rico waved from under the hood of a car. A new patch on his jumpsuit. Wilson Auto Apprenticeship Program. Frank smiled. Things really change, he said. Caleb nodded. Sometimes it just takes someone pushing back. They sat in silence a while longer. Then Frank said. You staying? Caleb didn't answer at first. Then. For a while. Frank nodded. Good. They watched the city wake. Together.